So, Prince William and Princess Anne just confirmed something that completely changes how you have to think about everything that's been happening inside the palace. And honestly, the part that keeps bothering me isn't even the official message. It's the argument that happened right before they made it. The royal family has made statements ready for every situation you can think of. Scandal, separation, succession, chaos. But nothing, absolutely nothing, got them ready for this moment. William had to stand up and confirm that his youngest son, Prince Louis, has been diagnosed with a rare young person's brain and nerve disorder. And here's what makes the whole thing so much more hard than a regular health update. William wanted to control the story before it controlled them. Catherine was very scared of her son being turned into just a diagnosis instead of a person. And Princess Anne ended up becoming the only person strong enough to stand between all of them and the working of the monarchy. That's where it gets really interesting, because the diagnosis itself is serious. It affects how he moves, how he coordinates his body, and how stable he is physically. But the real story is how the family broke apart in private over whether to tell anyone at all. And then how Anne stepped in to basically change the rules of what a royal childhood is supposed to look like. Before we go any further, make sure to subscribe to Crown Watch so you never miss an update on this story. The thing that makes this whole situation feel different from the usual palace health announcement is that William didn't walk into that briefing room at Windsor Castle, surrounded by helpers and communication workers. He walked in with Princess Anne behind him, close enough to help him, but careful not to make his pain look like weakness. And that picture alone tells you everything about where the real power sits in this family right now. Windsor Castle has seen declarations of power for hundreds of years, but this one carried no happiness whatsoever. Household officials waited quietly, as William put both hands on the table and began reading a statement that had clearly been practiced. Louis had received a formal diagnosis. The condition would need long-term treatment, fewer public appearances, and big changes to his daily routine. And then he got to the phrase, "our youngest son," and his voice just broke. Anne lowered her eyes to protect him in that moment, not because she was uncomfortable, but because she understood exactly what that crack in his control was going to cause once the news spread. She had been fighting with him behind closed doors about this exact moment for weeks, and thought silence had become risky, that letting rumors happen would be worse than controlling the story. But William feared telling people would trap his son inside a name and a label he never chose. And Catherine was somewhere in the middle, really angry at the idea of reducing her child to a palace statement. That fight sat between all of them as they stood together in front of the cameras. And honestly, the fact that they were able to show they agreed with each other at all, given what had been happening in private, is kind of amazing. The diagnosis didn't come out of nowhere, which is the part that makes the timeline so painful when you actually look at what was happening in the months before this. Specialists had been watching unexplained tiredness, unsteady movement, and times when Louis struggled to control his hands for a while. Those symptoms would appear and then go away, which is why early medical checks pointed toward exhaustion or a temporary growing problem rather than anything about his brain and nerves. Catherine noticed every single change, but the symptoms were so different each time that she feared scaring her son before anyone understood what was really happening. William held on to the exhaustion explanation because it gave him hope. He told himself that rest would bring the boy's strength back, and the family could keep life normal. That belief completely fell apart during a private practice at Windsor, a closed practice for a future appearance, where the family practices timing and movement before public events. Louis walked across the reception room toward his father and suddenly lost his balance. There was no thing in his path, no playful distraction. In one moment he was moving forward, and the next he was on the floor confused and frightened, while William rushed toward him and the entire room stopped moving. He tried to stand up, but couldn't make his legs work. William dropped beside him and asked him to squeeze both hands. The child gripped one firmly, but the other barely moved, and the look on William's face changed from worry to terror in an instant. Catherine saw several helpers still staring and ordered the room cleared with an anger born from panic, not pride. Anne moved right away, closing the doors and telling staff to remove every unofficial mention of the incident from the internal schedule, the private calendar used to coordinate royal activity. She was not going to allow Louis's fear to become palace gossip. A doctor examined Louis moments later and recognized the pattern right away. The fall matched the earlier tiredness, the unsteady balance, the weak grip, and he urged immediate brain and nerve testing while warning William that waiting could cost valuable treatment time. That's when Anne found out something that made her anger turn cold. 2 earlier moments had been dismissed by junior staff as childish clumsiness. She demanded names, dates, and every written account. William followed the specialist into a private room and asked the question no father wants to speak out loud. Would his son get completely better? And the doctor paused before answering. That silence hurt harder than any diagnosis. Do you think Anne was right to step in and fight the palace to protect Louis, or should William have followed the official procedures? Tell us what you believe in the comments below. And if you think Catherine's fear about her son's privacy was completely fair, don't stay silent. Like this video right now, share it with everyone who cares about the royal family, and subscribe to Royal Daily Report immediately. Every like and every share tells YouTube to show what's really happening inside the palace, instead of letting the official story be the only one people hear. If you want to know the truth about how this family is actually dealing with crisis, make your voice heard before we move on to the next story. So, the fall created the emergency, but the final test results created a totally different fight, because William, Catherine, and Anne were about to really disagree over whether protecting Louis meant keeping the truth hidden or speaking before someone else did. And this fight didn't take place in front of advisors or doctors. It happened behind a closed door with no helpers present, just the 3 of them, facing a question no rule could answer. William feared losing control of the story. Catherine feared losing control of her child's life, and feared waiting would allow others to make the decision for them. Catherine read the final diagnosis report twice before putting it down. The specialists had confirmed the disorder was serious, yet could be handled with early and ongoing treatment, which meant hope remained, but only if Louis got time, protection, and freedom from unnecessary pressure. Palace communication officials had already written a limited statement because cancelled family appearances were getting attention, and a palace communication statement is basically an official message released to control what the public is told. To William, silence was becoming risky. Catherine pushed the draft back across the table and said it sounded cold, distant, almost constitutional, that nothing in it caught the fear Louis had shown after the fall, or the confusion in his voice when adults lowered theirs around him. She told him, "He is our son," not a palace statement. And William answered that refusing to speak would not stop the story, that if pieces leaked first, their child would be exposed without protection. His voice got louder when Catherine accused him of thinking like an heir before thinking like a father. He insisted he was doing both because he had no choice. She told him that choice was exactly what Louis was losing. Anne remained quiet through all of this, but the tension sharpened around her because she had watched them carry sadness in different ways, and now those differences were breaking into the open. Then Anne dropped the information that changed the entire situation. Through a private household briefing she had personally checked, she revealed that someone within the wider royal staff had already asked to access Louis's changed schedule. She refused to say who the person was until she knew why the request had been made, but the warning was enough. The secret was already moving beyond the family, and she proposed a joint confirmation led by William, with herself beside him, to block intrusive pressure. The Princess Royal, a title traditionally given to the monarch's oldest daughter, would act as both witness and shield. Catherine would stay with Louis, far from the machinery surrounding the announcement. William stood and moved toward the door, and Catherine stopped him by saying his name. He turned, and she pressed the medical file against his chest and told him that if he spoke, he must speak as a father, not as the future king. Anne set down her pen and promised that no royal timetable would ever be more important than the boy's treatment. The family had reached agreement, but courage alone was not going to protect Louis. Because inside the monarchy, compassion does not always control the calendar. This is where Anne's role becomes absolutely important to understanding how this family is going to work going forward. William may be the heir, but in the hours after the diagnosis, it became clear that Anne understands how to turn sadness into action, in a way that nobody else in that family does. She knows which officials will cooperate, which traditions can be stopped, and which voices will resist behind polite expressions. Her power doesn't come from a crown waiting in the future. It comes from decades of service and an unwillingness to let royal machinery consume a vulnerable child. She began by checking every obligation attached to Louis's name: family appearances, ceremonial practices, travel plans, events requiring long periods of standing, all of it placed under immediate scrutiny. An engagement book is the official working calendar used to organize royal duties, and every entry now carried a different weight. What once looked routine could leave the child exhausted, exposed, or frightened. William gave his aunt full authority to negotiate the changes, and he was moving between medical talks with Catherine and the other children, while guilt followed him everywhere. He worried that asking Aunt to fight the institution meant abandoning his own duty, and she ended that thought with one sentence: "Your place is where Louis looks for you." He fell quiet because he knew she was right. Anne faced pushback almost immediately. Several officials warned that removing the boy from public occasions would create obvious gaps and encourage guessing, and she could hear the calculation beneath their concern. They were protecting appearance while a child was learning how to trust his own body again. Her anger rose, but she controlled it because one uncontrolled confrontation could turn Louis's treatment into a wider palace fight. Then she discovered an old household protocol requiring young royal children to maintain limited ceremonial participation unless they are physically unable. A household protocol is an internal rule guiding how members of the family carry out official expectations, and she rejected the wording right away. Emotional safety and active treatment, she argued, must be enough. A child should not have to collapse before tradition allows him to rest. A senior official still refused to cancel one major appearance, warning that the absence could take over headlines and weaken public confidence. And Anne placed the specialist's written recommendation on the table and accepted personal responsibility for changing the schedule. When he continued explaining the reputation consequences, she closed the engagement book with one firm movement and said the discussion was over. She left the meeting and entered an empty side room where for one brief moment her shoulders fell and the strength went away from her face. Then William called. She answered with a steady voice and told them the calendar had been changed. The first fight was won, but the deeper damage was already beginning, because Catherine was about to discover that people no longer see Louis before they see his diagnosis. Do you believe Anne made the right choice to override the palace rules and put Louis's health before royal duties? Or do you think the monarchy's traditions should have come first? Let us know in the comments section below. And if you think Catherine's fight to keep her son's dignity in the middle of all this proves she's an incredible mother, don't let this message get lost. Like this video, share it with your friends and family, and subscribe to Royal Daily Report right now. When you stay quiet, palace stories get told however they want. When thousands of viewers respond together, YouTube pushes the real truth forward, instead of letting official statements hide what actually happened. If you believe families like this deserve support and understanding, prove it by sharing this before we move to the next royal moment. The morning after the announcement, Windsor felt unfamiliar to the family living inside it. Messages arrived from across the world. Security procedures changed. Staff began speaking more carefully whenever Louis entered a room. Nothing openly mean happened, but Catherine noticed something that frightened her almost as much as the diagnosis itself. People were no longer reacting to her son before they reacted to his condition. In trying to show they cared, the palace had begun making him feel watched. Louis faced changes he never chose. His public appearances were stopped. His schooling was adjusted, and medical therapy became part of every week. Public appearances or official appearances carried out on behalf of the royal family, and removing them protects his health, while also drawing attention to his absence. William and Catherine explained the diagnosis in simple words. His body needs extra help with balance and movement, but he is still exactly the same boy. Louis wanted to believe them. Then an aide reached for an item he had always carried alone, and the child pulled it back sharply, asking why everyone suddenly thinks he cannot do anything. Catherine heard the anger beneath the question. It was not only frustration, it was fear that the diagnosis had changed how every adult measures him. She confronted the household later that day, not shouting, but with every word landing with force. Support must never become humiliation. Staff must ask before touching, carrying, guiding, or stepping in. Her sadness hardened into protection, because kindness without respect can still hurt, and she refused to let concern steal her son's independence. Meanwhile, William received a private message from a trusted communications advisor warning that details beyond the official statement were moving around. Details mentioning the weak grip, the sudden fall, and the delayed response of one hand. Those facts were never released. Someone had spoken about the Windsor practice, and Anne began tracing every person present during the incident. Through a documented internal account, she discovered that one aide had contacted an external advisor shortly after the fall, thinking the palace needed to prepare for a possible public crisis. The decision may have come from fear, but it placed Louis's private pain in risky hands. Louis later tried to cross a garden path alone, and halfway through his confidence broke, and he stopped. William did not rush forward. He waited until his son reached out, and then took his hand without lifting or carrying him. That small choice said what words cannot. William removed Louis's prepared schedule from the notice board that evening, and replaced it with a blank sheet, telling Catherine that their son's life would no longer be arranged around royal expectation. But the deepest wound remained hidden, because Louis was about to tell Anne what he feared most, and it had nothing to do with treatment. The crisis changed direction, not in a formal meeting, but during a private conversation between a grandmother-like aunt and a frightened child. With no advisors, cameras, or medical language between them, Louis finally admitted what the diagnosis had made him believe. He was not most afraid of treatment. He was afraid his father would stop being proud of him. For Anne, that confession exposed the true fight the family must now face. She had been spending more time alone with Louis after noticing how quiet he became whenever William entered the room. The boy watched his father closely, measuring every step, every pause, every unsteady movement against the prince's reaction. Louis had overheard adults discussing which royal duties must now be cancelled, and without understanding why, he began to believe he had failed. He finally asked whether William would still take him to important events when he grows older. The question sounds simple, but Anne heard the fear beneath it. He was not asking about ceremonies. He was asking whether illness had removed him from his father's future. Anne answered carefully, telling him that adults sometimes make children feel responsible for pain they never caused. William's sadness, she explained, comes from love and fear, never disappointment. The future king is not sad about the child in front of him. He is sad about the fact that his son must face something he cannot fight for him. Then Louis revealed something during that private conversation that completely changes how you understand the timeline leading up to the diagnosis. He had noticed his balance changing before the Windsor practice. He had stumbled in private and hidden it. He had dropped things and said nothing because he did not want Catherine or William to worry. Anne felt the truth strike hard, because his effort to appear brave may have actually delayed the family's understanding. Yet, she refused to let guilt replace fear, and promised that he would never again need to hide pain to protect the adults around him. When Louis asked her to swear that his father was still proud, she removed a small service pin from her jacket and placed it in his palm. A service pin is a small symbol, worn to mark duty and commitment, and she told him, "Courage is not standing without falling. It is telling someone when help is needed." William entered later, and Louis spoke before fear could stop him, admitting that he thought he had become a burden. The prince knelt, pulled him close, and said, "The family will change every plan necessary, but it will never ask him to earn his place." That promise changes everything, because once Louis understood he had not lost his father's pride, the family was finally ready to face the world. And the world's response turned out to be more emotional than anyone inside Windsor expected. By sunrise, the diagnosis was no longer only a family crisis. It had become a moment shared by millions of parents who understand the terror of hearing that a child's life has changed. Outside Windsor Castle, handwritten messages appeared beside flowers and small toys. Broadcasters abandoned their usual language of royal strategy and spoke instead about vulnerability, childhood, and fear. For once, the monarchy was not being watched from a distance. It was being held. William saw the morning newspapers lead with his joint confirmation beside Anne, the coverage focusing less on succession politics and more on the pain and a father's voice and the protective care of the Princess Royal. Succession refers to the official order determining who will inherit the throne. But for one day, that machinery felt almost not important. The public was not asking what the diagnosis means for the crown. They were asking what it means for a child. Medical charities responded with calls for greater awareness of brain and nerve disorders affecting young people. Families began sharing recorded messages and written accounts about treatment, fear, and the long process of adapting to a different future. William was moved by their honesty. Yet the attention troubled him, because sympathy can comfort, but it can also become pressure if Louis begins to believe he must perform courage for strangers. Catherine refused a proposal for a staged photograph. She would not place her son before the public simply to reassure people watching from outside. The princess understood that Louis was still learning how to name his own fear, and asking him to smile for the nation would turn private confusion into another duty. Anne offered a different path, a short written response thanking every family that had shared its story, with no new medical details and no demand that the boy appear. William agreed, and then added one personal sentence. His son's worth has never depended on ceremonial duty, physical ability, or public expectation. That statement changed the tone of the entire day. At Cambridge Gate, one of Windsor Castle's main public entrances, a group of parents placed a blue ribbon around a small toy crown. Beside it rested a card reading, "For Louis, strength is asking for a hand." A national broadcaster showed the tribute during its evening bulletin and called it the image that captured the country's feeling. William watched the report privately with Anne and recognized the message right away, because it echoed the words she had given Louis in confidence. He turned toward his aunt, unable to speak, and she simply nodded. The world had delivered its answer with compassion, but the final verdict still belonged to William, because he had to decide whether the crown would continue shaping Louis or finally reshape itself around him. The diagnosis cannot be reversed by rank, privilege, or tradition, and William knows this now. He cannot command his son's body to heal, erase the fear from Catherine's heart, or guarantee that the road ahead will be easy. But he can decide what the monarchy demands from Louis. He can decide whether a child must struggle to fit an ancient institution, or whether that institution must finally learn to bend. His final choice becomes the clearest statement of his future reign. William gathered Catherine and the senior household leadership for one final meeting. The panic had passed, No one was fighting over leaks or statements or cancelled appearances anymore. They were deciding what kind of life Louis would be allowed to have. Senior household leadership means the officials who organize royal duties and advise the family on public responsibilities. And for once, those responsibilities were being placed beneath the child's health. Medical specialists confirmed that treatment may improve Louis's stability and independence. But no one can promise a fixed timeline. Progress will come slowly, unevenly, and without regard for ceremony. William admitted that his first thought was to preserve normality by keeping parts of the old schedule. But he now sees the danger in that decision, because it would have forced his son to prove he could still meet expectations created before the diagnosis. Catherine asked the question still bothering her, whether removing every obligation could make Louis feel left out from the family's future. Anne answered with calm certainty that protection does not mean permanent isolation. It means giving him a genuine choice without guilt, pressure, or public punishment. The Princess Royal knows the difference between duty freely chosen and duty forced upon a frightened child. William made the decision final. Every automatic ceremonial expectation placed on Louis during childhood was abolished. Ceremonial expectations are the formal appearances and traditions royal children are normally prepared to perform. And from now on he will attend only when he wishes, when his parents agree, and when doctors believe it is safe. William went further, establishing a protected family policy, stating that the medical needs of every royal child must take priority over public schedules. Louis's diagnosis will not become a private exception hidden behind palace walls. It will create permanent change. William lifted the old engagement calendar and tore out the pages carrying his son's cancelled duties, then placed a blank diary before Catherine and said, "From now on, his life is written around who he is, not what they expected him to be." Catherine closed her eyes as relief finally broke through her control and placed a hand on the future king's shoulder, because his greatest act of leadership had not been the use of royal power. It had been the decision to limit it. William later explained everything to Louis, and the boy asked whether he may still attend important events when he feels strong enough. His father smiled and told him the choice will always belong to him. The diagnosis has changed a young life, but it has not diminished Louis, separated him from his father, or weakened his place within the family. Anne's loyalty gave them strength. William's courage gave that strength meaning, and together they turned tragedy into protection. The crown does not emerge untouched. It emerges changed. For generations, royal children were expected to adapt themselves to duty. But in this moment, duty adapts itself to a child. There is no further secret waiting behind the palace doors, and no unresolved verdict left to deliver. Prince Louis remains fully loved, fully protected, and fully part of the family. The monarchy will change before it ever asks him to become less than himself. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe.